Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 27th of July of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And this video we're going to start with Orechov bridgehead, with the Battle of Robotyne, with the Bradley Square or the Bradley Town Hall or whatever. And as you can see on this map, currently we see a lot of geolocations. Today we got another portion of geolocated videos, and but I would like to add not just the videos geolocations that we received today, because now it's very difficult to understand the real plans and the real purposes of the Ukrainian attack. I believe that it is better to use the geolocation since the beginning of the video of this week, so since the beginning of that Ukrainian offensive operation. And basically, according to all these geolocations, all these icons, 80% of them are geolocated, and just 20% is informational icons, maybe without real geolocations. But anyway, we see that during this week the Ukrainians were trying to attack the Russian positions, not inside of Robotyne, the settlement. The Ukrainians maybe made few attempts to enter the settlement, and there was some kind of updates, pieces of information about that. But mainly, according to this video, we see that the Ukrainians were trying to develop their bridgehead, their positions between Robotyne and, let's say, Verbova fortification area. So now let's start adding some arrows. According to the facts and geolocated videos, we see that the secondary wave of attack the Ukrainians made along this yellow line. The second area of attack, the second direction of Ukrainian attack, took place a little bit to the east of the main attack area and was going to the south, and after that the Ukrainians continued developing their offensive operation further to the south, and this is the secondary direction of Ukrainian attack. Also, at some point of time during the offensive operation, the Ukrainians took a decision to split their forces in the eastern offensive fist, and after that they start moving in central area, among these fields to the east as well. So we have at least this information, these updates, and of course there was some kind of movements between two roads of attacks along this area. So this is I'm not sure that this is the real dispositions or changes of the positions. It's just a regular exchange of forces between two lines of attack, between two fists. Now let's discuss both directions, and let's start trying to understand what is the further Ukrainian plans in this area. For example, when talking about the offensive operation direction of Robotyne, the Russians published a lot of geolocated video confirmations how they were trying to attack and destroy the Ukrainians Bradley. This video took place not, let's say, these previous 24 hours. This video took place, as I understand, during the previous 48 hours. But we see that the Russians managed to discover and managed to destroy the Ukrainian forces. The only thing that was noted by the Russians is that the Ukrainians weren't disorganized. The Russians mentioned that the Ukrainians were pretty organized. They knew exactly what they were doing. They knew exactly what they need to do, and the Ukrainians were acting very professional during this battle. Of course, the Ukrainians lost a lot of armored vehicles, but the fact that during that offensive operation, during that bombing and shelling from the Russian side, the Ukrainians did find the time even to make evacuations. So very interesting. Anyway, we understand that the Western attack was repelled by the Russians, and probably the Ukrainians were completely defeated. But the question is whether the Ukrainians managed to achieve the goals of that offensive operation on the western flank, let's say, of the entire movements to the south. It's very difficult to understand because on this video we see another attempt. As you can see, another thing that you need to note is that the Ukrainians involved significant number of armored forces, like tanks, like Bradley's armored vehicles, like personal carriers. And another thing that you need to pay attention to is that we almost haven't seen infantry on the ground in comparison with the previous days. And this is also a very interesting fact, but for now I can't tell you exactly why we haven't seen a lot of forces. And furthermore, the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation also reported that as a result of all those clashes, the Ukrainians lost around 30-35 armored vehicles. At least we got these numbers today. For example, the Ukrainians lost 39 armored vehicles, but just 280 soldiers, including on the front line starting from Petykhatki to the South Donetsk area. So we see that this is the stage when the Ukrainians are trying to dig in deeper using armored fists to the south. So that was the eastern offensive. That was the western feast. Now let's move to the eastern feast. From this area, the Ukrainians also started their movement somewhere from the northern yellow cloud. They were moving to the south, and we got the first updates, the first geolocations of destroyed Ukrainian armored vehicles somewhere in this area. It was the beginning of that operation that took place a few days ago. And after that, the Ukrainians started moving to the south. There were updates that how the Russians managed to destroy the Ukrainians armored vehicles among the forest lines, and that was a very interesting, very nice ambush by the Russians, because all these fields are mined and the Ukrainians haven't managed to demine them all, and they know the certain particular ways that they can use for attacks, and one of those passages was blocked by the Russian Lancet attack. As a result of that attack, the armored vehicle was destroyed. And for example, behind those forces, there was another Ukrainian armored vehicle that were moving, heading to the south, but these forces were blocked because of that armored vehicle that was destroyed a few minutes ago, probably by Lancet. And the Ukrainians were forced to step back because they knew exactly that the fields around this attack road was mined, and it was very dangerous to use any other direction. But as you can see on this video, the Ukrainians took a decision to push that destroyed armored vehicles and to continue their offensive operation further. As soon as the Ukrainians got, let's say, the fields between Rabotine and Verbovo fortifications, the Russians start bombing and shelling the Ukrainians heavily with the drones, with artillery, with all types of weapons they have. And we got the first losses of the eastern offensive feast. Some Ukrainian forces took a decision to split and go to the central part. Maybe the Ukrainians took a decision to reinforce their offensive operation on the western flank, and the Ukrainian armored vehicles started movements, and after that the Russians started bombing and shelling them. And as you can see, and one more time, the Ukrainians, even in this offensive operation, in this part of offensive operation, were using significant number of armored vehicles. On this video, we just saw how the Russians attacked Leopard, now T-64 with drones, and a lot of armored vehicles were destroyed, of course. There is more geolocations. For example, we see this, we can recognize this area with this forest. Another Ukrainian armored fist. They are standing for some reason on the ground. Some Ukrainian forces started movements along the fields, and they got onto minefields and also were destroyed. And that attack also was repelled by the minefields and manpass or some kind of tow weapon. The Russians also published from this area the Lancet that we just saw you, that the Ukrainians lost T-64 tank as a result of Russian Lancet strike. And we haven't received any video or any video confirmations of Ukrainian losses in this side of the field. So that's mean, as I understand, the Ukrainians haven't managed to enter this, let's say, circle within the western road of attack and, let's say, central road of attack. But we got a lot of videos during the previous week, during the week of the Ukrainian counter-offensive operation, from the edge eastern road of attack, from this area. And for example, the first video we got from this area was this one. The Ukrainians managed somehow to bypass the Russian positions, the Russian trenches, or the Russians were forced to step back. And then the Ukrainian soldiers landed in this area and started attacking the Russian trenches. The thing that you need to note is to put in your minds is the ex-Russian fortifications. On this video, we see that there is at least the grass, trees, and the leaves on the trees. This is very important because few days later we got the same video from the same area, and currently we don't see more grass in this area. We see a lot of a very powerful, very big accumulation of the Ukrainian forces. The Ukrainian tanks are moving more and more to the south. A lot of tanks were destroyed, a lot of tanks were abandoned, a lot of soldiers were killed, and there were almost no leaves on the trees. Everything was burned, probably within attacks of TOS flamethrower systems. On this video we see another destroy of another Ukrainian tank. But anyway, the Ukrainians managed to reach this, let's say, defense belt and to get there a lot of armored vehicles. After that, after this battle, after the Ukrainians managed to accumulate their forces within these trenches and these fortifications, we haven't received any video or photo confirmations whether the Ukrainians were able to proceed further and to, let's say, to get the next defense belt. And I'm talking about this line. We haven't received any updates whether the Ukrainians were able to reach this line, but we know for sure that the Ukrainians were able to get this line. Furthermore, we got more and more losses. The Ukrainians sent a lot of armored vehicles, and they were attacked by the Russian missiles, by the Russian flamethrower systems, by the Russian artillery systems, and so on. We got another video from this area, how the Ukrainian tank was destroyed as a result of artillery strike. This event took place not today, but probably yesterday. So significant losses. But anyway, now we can understand that according to these facts, those facts we just discussed, the Ukrainians, the main Ukrainian direction is to attack to the south. And the Ukrainians are trying to keep a distance from the Robotina, at least the eastern edge offensive feast. The Ukrainians, the forces of that feast, try to keep a distance with Robotina. Of course, it doesn't mean that it helps them, because we saw how just a few minutes ago how many armored vehicles did the Ukrainians lost on this bridgehead. But anyway, all these facts, all these geolocated videos at least tells me that Ukrainians are not going to storm Robotina in front, and that the main purpose of the Ukrainians within the next few days is to establish control over this bridgehead. Let's say to develop their bridgehead, their offensive operation to the south, and to capture this, let's say, gray cloud. And after that, yesterday we discussed that probably the Ukrainians' main purpose is to establish fire control over the road between Novopokrovka and Robotina. But today, when I saw the number of armored vehicles that Ukrainians were using during that attack, I understood that Ukrainians are not going just to establish fire control. They will try their luck, and they will try to attack and to storm with armored vehicles the settlement on the south, Novopokrovka. So this is the main purpose, and with this attack the Ukrainians will be able to cut Robotina from supply support, to encircle Russian forces there, and probably to capture the entire bridgehead, the entire sector, which will allow them, which will give them some time, and they will be able to develop this bridgehead to the east and to the west. Another fact that you need to mention too is that Ukrainians during that week haven't tried to make any attempt to attack and to develop their bridgehead to the west of Robotin, to the northwest of Robotin. We haven't seen such attacks. The only things we got is that the Russians discovered probably a few Ukrainian armored vehicles that were some kind of rearguard forces, or this is not even an armored vehicle, that was even just a small light car that the Russians managed to discover and to destroy. So the Ukrainians are not even trying to attack and to develop their offensive operation to the west. But a few days ago we discussed that Ukrainians probably would try to develop this bridgehead, but as now we understand that that was just a regular, let's say, speculation attempt to try to force the Russians probably to move some forces there, to move some reserves there, and so on. Also, we need to mention this as well. Today we got a very interesting video from the area between Verbova and Russian, and let's say the Bradley Square, and we are talking about this icon. There was a post made by the Western sources saying that somehow the Ukrainians managed to get there. We got just 2 videos from this area, and this is the first video from that Telegram channel. And the author of that video, the Russian soldier, the Russian officer, told us that on this video we can see the Ukrainian personal armored carrier that was going through the fields. And the author of that video told us that this vehicle, the driver of that vehicle, lost himself, and he didn't know exactly where. Probably he is the luckiest guy ever if he was able to bypass all the Russians' defense belt and to get here. So very interesting situation, and this is the only evidence of Ukrainian presence in this area. Also, there was another video, but for some reason the player doesn't want to play this video, is some strikes in this area with the Russian artillery systems. So something did happen there. It's very difficult to understand which directions the Ukrainians were using to get there, but somehow they managed to get this line, or at least one armored vehicle. Maybe he lost himself or something like this, but for now I believe we need to pay attention to this area, because probably we're not getting the entire picture from this area. But let's pay attention to this icon, because maybe the Ukrainians launched another offensive operation, let's say from the north, and somehow managed to penetrate the Russians' defense belt and to get these fortifications. For now, this is just speculation based on one video of lost Ukrainian armored vehicle. The Ukrainians from their side continue bombing and shelling the Russian positions in the vicinity between Pologi and, let's say, Rabotina, in the area of Verbova, Novopokrovka. For example, Novopokrovka, the Chechen forces, Chechen battalions during this week established their positions, mortar positions, and were bombing and shelling the Russians in the settlement by the name of Novopokrovka. And basically that means that Ukrainians have brought in this area, have redeployed in this area their strategical reserves and the forces that had some rest after the Battle of Bakhmut. And today the Russians reported that the main forces that took place in the Battle of Rabotina were the forces of 118th Mechanized Brigade, this brigade with this claw on their flag, and the forces of 116th Mechanized Brigade. Where's the 16th, 17th, this one, 16th with the tiger on their icon. There were some parts of 47s, but 47s, according to the Russian sources, lost around 80% of their personnel. Maybe the rest of the forces were stretched between those two brigades, and those three brigades were attacking the Russian positions. Also, we got another video how the Ukrainians destroyed Russian radar in this area, counter-artillery radar. So, and as you can see, not many, the Ukrainians haven't published a lot of videos from this bridgehead. The Russians published a video how they were bombing and shelling the Ukrainian positions along these railroad ways in front of Zaliznichne. And as I remember, this is the second video from this area. The first one took place 2 weeks ago. The Russians were bombing this area using the flamethrower systems, and now we see the Russians were attacking this area with tanks. And so we see maybe there are some fortifications and some stronghold of the Ukrainian forces. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of fierce fightings on the front line between Zhiribyanki and Ugledar, the Ukrainians lost 280 soldiers, 39 armored vehicles, including 25 tanks, 9 armored vehicles, and 3 personal carriers and 2 light vehicles. Furthermore, the Ukrainians lost 3 artillery systems. And very interesting piece of information about artillery systems. Probably for the first time since the beginning of the battle in the south, the Ukrainians during the previous 24 hours lost just Western artillery systems. 1 Vampire and 2 FH-70, probably it's British howitzers or something like this. Very interesting updates are coming from Staromayorska, from Vremivka tactical bridgehead. Most of the sources have already confirmed that Ukrainians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to enter the northern part of that settlement. Probably, and I expect that within the next 48 hours the Russians will be forced to step back either from Staromayorska and Urozhaine, because if Staromayorska falls, it is very difficult to hold Urozhaine. The Ukrainians published a video how they were attacking the Russian infantry, Russian armored vehicles on the south of Staromayorsk with the drones. On this video we see how probably the Russians abandoned armored vehicle and the Ukrainians took a decision to destroy this armored vehicle or something like this. Yet we haven't received the results of that attack, but anyway we see that the Russians were forced to step back, and currently they try to control the southern part of the settlement and not to allow the Ukrainians to capture Staromayorsk easily and to penetrate the Russians' defense belt further to the settlement by the name of, let's say, Staromlynovka. When talking about Urozhaine, the same situation, the Ukrainians are pushing and pushing. One more time, repeat myself, I expect that these two settlements are going to fall within the next 48 hours. Another video from Staromlynovska. The Ukrainians managed to discover the Russian positions in the fields. That was another personal carrier, armored personal carrier of the Russian forces. The Ukrainians managed to discover Russian positions, and just using a regular drone, they tracked that armored vehicle and destroyed them by drone strike. And after that, the armored vehicle, Russian armored vehicle, was destroyed, burned, and then was destroyed. Now we are moving further, and we are going to Donetsk front line. We also got a lot of updates from this bridgehead, and probably the most important ones are coming from Staromayorska, because according to the geolocated facts and according to the pieces of information we got during this week, I see that the Russians launched the offensive operation in direction of that settlement. Let's establish the calendar for the week. For the entire week, and we see that we got at least 4 updates from this area. There was the 5th one. I just missed that video of the smokes inside of the settlement. For example, during this week, the Russians, as we saw, destroyed Ukrainian tow positions in the building that Ukrainians were using to attack Russian tanks that were attacking the Ukrainian coal mine when the coal mine was under Russian control. Also, we got the video how the Russians destroyed the Ukrainian artillery system to the west of that settlement that Ukrainians were using also to support their defense forces in coal mine when the coal mine was under Russian control, under Ukrainian control. And today we got 2 fresh videos how the Russians brought finally their artillery systems to the combat line and started bombing and shelling Krasnogorovka with the Grad systems. On this video we see how the Russians were bombing that settlement and the Ukrainian positions. And as you can see, these coal mines is that on the bottom corner of the video is under Russian control. And the second video also about the Grad systems, but probably from another angle, from another squad, and the same situation. The Russians were bombing that settlement during another part of the day. So currently this is not the real offensive operation, of course, but something like the beginning or preparation before something more, something bigger in direction of that settlement. The Ukrainians just posted a video during the week how they were bombing and attacking the Russians in the coal mine. So the Russians were having some positions in that building, and the Ukrainians dropped few grenades inside of those buildings. Also, we got very interesting updates from Novosovsk. There are very fierce clashes between the Russians and the Ukrainians. There are not so many forces, like thousands, like we can find in the Zaporozhye area, just the battle of few platoons, or even a small squad. But after the Ukrainians, as a result of counter-offensive operation, managed to recapture these positions, the Russians managed to accumulate some forces and now started bombing and shelling this territory using artillery systems. On this video we see how the Ukrainians lost 2 armored vehicles, then the Ukrainians sent a tank to support their forces. The Russians managed to track and discover this tank among the forest lines, and after the Russians sent the coordinates of that tank to their artillery squad and to their drone squad, the drones managed to discover the tank among the fields and to attack them. We haven't received any video confirmations of the results of that attack, but probably that armored vehicle was damaged and the Ukrainians were forced to step back from this area. Now we are moving to Bakhmut, to Artyomovsk. As you can see, we also got a lot of updates from this area, and even based on the colors of icons we can understand the main focus of the Russians and the main focuses of the Ukrainians on this bridgehead. According to the Russian geolocated videos, we see that the Russians are completely focused on the central part of this area. Basically, the Ukrainians still use like Ivanovska, Kalinovka, Bogdanovka, Grigorovka as the main logistic road, main logistic chain. If they need to send forces to the north, they're using this logistic chain and they're sending their forces to Orekhovo-Vasilievka. If they need to send the forces to the south, they're using the same area and they're moving their forces to the south. And the Russians just attacked the Ukrainians on their move on this area. And when talking about the Ukrainians, we see that they're mainly focused on Klishchievka, and also the Ukrainians mainly focused on the northern part in the vicinity of Rozdolovka. Now let's discuss Klishchievka and let's take the updates just of today. We haven't received much updates. We had information that Ukrainians have already prepared at least 2 pontoon bridges, that yet the Russians haven't destroyed them, and at least we haven't received such a piece of information. And we had a video from Klishchiivka, inside of Klishchiivka. As you can see on this video, this is just a regular situation, just a small episode, 20-second video of the situation. We don't see any movements of any soldiers, and we still haven't received any normal 100% confirmation that the Russians were forced to step back from the north eastern part of that settlement. And furthermore, today the Ukrainians published another video how they were bombing, how they bombed the Russian positions, Russian soldiers, infantry in the vicinity of Andreevka, which also confirms that this settlement is under Russian control. But if you take a look at this picture, you see that there are almost nothing left of Andreevka. Every single building is almost reduced to ruins, and basically there is nothing to protect, nothing to defend, and so on. The Minister of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of fierce fightings on Donetsk front line, the Ukrainians lost 210 soldiers, 13 armored vehicles, including 1 tank, and 2 artillery systems. Furthermore, when talking about the Battle of Klishchiivka itself, during the previous days, the Ukrainians made a lot of attempts to attack the Russian positions in that area, and the Ukrainians lost 120 soldiers and 9 armored vehicles during the Battle of Klishchiivka within the previous 24 hours. The Russians published new videos how they were bombing the Ukrainian positions, the Ukrainian forces along the railroad ways. On this video we see the destroyed T-64 tank by probably by attack of Lancet, and on this video we see how the Ukrainians were trying to hide their artillery system that they were using to attack, to bomb the Russian positions in Klishchiivka. The Russians managed to track that artillery system and to destroy that artillery system also with Lancet drone. On the northern flank, the Russians were bombing and shelling the Ukrainians' infantry in the trenches on the east of Grigorivka, right in front of Russian positions, in the forest in front of them. The Russians managed to discover Ukrainian positions and to destroy their stronghold with artillery system. When talking about the northern flank, we haven't received any updates from, let's say, from 10th Mountain Assault Brigade. We haven't received any more videos of their 8 separate battalion, how they were bombing and shelling the Russians in Berestova. So I suppose that there is a small operational pause, and the Ukrainians currently try to solve the issues with weapon, munition, and probably within the next few days they will restart their bombing operation against the Russian forces. Meanwhile, the Russians are trying to improve their positions, to build more trenches, and to create new strongholds on these territories. Now we are getting to Liman front line. We haven't received a lot of updates. We almost have not received nothing. The only update, like big and strong update we received, is the report of Ministry of Defense. The Russians reported that as a result of fierce fightings on Liman front line, the Ukrainians lost around 185 soldiers, 6 armored vehicles, and 3 artillery systems. Also, the Russians confirmed that they managed to develop the bridgehead on the Ukrainian side of Zheribets River. The length of that bridgehead is around 30 kilometers, and the width of that bridgehead is around 3 kilometers. So let's just measure this territory, trying to understand, and let's try to understand whether the updates that we add on map is correct or not. So basically the northern point of that bridgehead starts in the vicinity of Nadia. This is the settlement Nadia, and now we can move to the south and we are getting to Novovodiana. So this should be the southern point of the bridgehead that the Russians were talking about, and the length of the front line of this line is around 30 kilometers. So basically now most of the mappers are right when adding this red cloud on this side of Zheribets River, at least when talking about the distance between the northern part and the southern part. At least this length completely correlate with the report of Ministry of Defense. Also, the Russians are saying that they managed to develop their bridgeheads, and the width of that bridgehead from Zheribets River is around 3 kilometers. So if we take Zheribets River somewhere in the vicinity of Karamzinovka in this area, and if we will try to calculate, this is 4 kilometers. So as I understand, the Russians yet haven't managed to establish control over Novoyegorovka, but some of the sources have already reported that the Russians are there. probably this settlement this settlement is in the gray zone, and Russia, and maybe there are also no Ukrainians, but according to these simple calculations, according to the report of Ministry of Defense, the Russians haven't entered this settlement. Now we are moving to the north, to the Kupiansk front line. There are also very fierce fightings, but we haven't received like updates at all, no videos from this bridgehead. The Ministry of Defense reported that as a result of fierce fightings, the Ukrainians lost 35 soldiers and 7 armored vehicles. As you can see, the level of losses is probably the lowest during the previous few days. Yesterday, the Ukrainians lost 135 soldiers on this bridgehead. And the final area we're going to discuss, of course, Kherson. The Russians and the Ukrainians continue counter-artillery duels. The Russians continue bombing and shelling their Russian side of Dnipro River in the vicinity of Antonov Bridge, that currently is under Russian-Ukrainian control as a result of artillery duels, of bombings using the guided bombs. The Ukrainians lost 25 soldiers, 3 armored vehicles, and 2 artillery systems D-30. The things that we also need to mention is that the Western countries confirmed that Ukrainians launched the second wave, the second chapter of their greatest counteroffensive operation in the south. Of course, we see the results, we see the numbers, we see the number of forces that Ukrainians involved in that operation, and of course, another thing that Ukrainian authorities confirmed that currently the Ukrainian ports in the south are blocked by the Russian Navy forces, and the Ukrainians don't have any possibilities to trade with the world, with their grain, with anything they have. And one more time, I'll remind you that the previous night the Russians launched significant missile attack, and a lot of airfields, airports and bases and many other things were bombed and attacked by the Russian missiles in the western part of Ukraine. A lot of fuel depots, a lot of industrial areas where the Ukrainians were creating their drones and so on. So the previous 24 hours were very difficult for the Ukrainians, and let's see what the next 24 hours is going to bring us. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.